Welcome, everybody, to the Primetime Podcast, hosted here on the MVG Nick YouTube channel. My name is Nick, and I hope you guys are doing well whenever you're checking out the latest episode of the podcast that talks about all things in the world of TV, news reviews, commentaries, and more. We have episode 11 for you guys today, and this is going to be the second to last episode of 2021 here. Hopefully you guys had a good year yourself. Looking forward to 2022. If you plan on having any New Year's resolutions, I wish you guys the best with that. And today we are going to be taking a look at a topic that's been floating around in my notes app for a little while, something that I've had on the brain for a few months now, and actually something related to a couple of videos that we've done on the channel prior outside of the podcast, which we really enjoy making for you guys, those being our TV tournament videos here. You guys may have seen these in the past. Me, my buddy Mike, my brother Matt, and my girlfriend Steph have all gotten together to do these in the past here. And essentially they are based on the March Madness tournaments, the NCAA tournaments there, but with a TV theme, of course. We've done two of these, the top sitcoms of all time and the top dramas of all time, and they are a ton of fun. We gather together, we compile a list of our favorite shows in these genres, and then we vote on them as we go throughout the tournament until we have two more remaining at the very end there, which are our final two of the top shows in that particular style, and we vote on those for one last time and declare our winner for that particular style there. And like I said, they are a lot of fun. You can look at those in the description if you choose to after this podcast here. But one thing that personally has always a little bit bothered me about those videos, even though I do love making them with those guys, is just the fact that they do come off a little bit predictable at times. Of course, there are some shows that either me or Mike or Matt have talked about on our channels in the past there, some of our personal favorites, such as How I Met Your Mother, such as Family Guy, such as Breaking Bad, for instance. And those are shows that end up doing really well in those tournaments there. Not to say that they don't deserve it by any means, but it is something that if you are a fan of us or you've seen our content in the past, it might come off a little bit more predictable than if we were to go into it with sort of an unbiased look here. And that is what I want to clear up with this podcast here. What we have is a little bit of a mini tournament in the works here, you can see. So on the right side there, we have 16 different shows that we are going to be using for this podcast here, what I'm calling the TV Sitcom podcast tournament here. And these 16 shows are different sitcoms that we have not seen in the past, so these were not included on the sitcom tournament, and they're all shows that I personally really enjoy, but I would not say that any of these are any of my top favorites. Like, none of these would rank in my top 10, but they're certainly far from the bottom as well there. We have a great variety of shows here, some live action, some sitcom, or some animated sitcoms as well here. We have old styles and new styles, current shows, some that have been on air for a very long time, some that were canceled after just a couple of seasons there. So a great variety to look over today. As well here, we are going to be using RNG for this tournament. As we go through, I'm going to pick two of these shows at random, compare them, and talk about their pros and cons there, and then pick out my favorite here. As we go through, we'll eliminate them one at a time until we are left with just two various shows here at the very end, and then we will determine our winner here for this mini tournament. Should be a very exciting one for you guys. Of course, I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these shows, which ones are your favorites as well here in the comments. And with that, let's get this bad boy started here. So of course, we have our RNG here, 1 through 16, matching what we have here on the notes. We're just going to pick two at random here. So the first one is going to be 8, which is going to be Kevin Can Wait. That is a great show with Kevin James, of course. and the other one is 1 here. So we have 8 simple rules going up against Kevin Can Wait here. So let's start with Kevin Can Wait. I'm going to pull this over here so we can compare those side by side and pull up the Google for you. So Kevin Can Wait was a sitcom that started back in 2016 here with Kevin James. It is a very simple family sitcom here. It kind of modeled itself after the King of Queens of sorts. You can see there Leah Remini was a part of this show as well. She played Carrie on the King of Queens alongside Kevin James, of course, back in the 90s. And it was essentially a retooled version of that as well. Erin Hayes was the original female lead for season 1. Then they brought on Leah Remini for season 2 here. Kevin James plays a retired police officer in this show. And throughout the first season, pretty much just does hijinks during his retirement with some of his close friends. When Leah Remini's character is brought in, she is a current police officer, and they basically do a mission together at the beginning of season 2, which lasts up until the end of the series there. I know a lot of people didn't really love it because it was kind of just a reimagining of an older sitcom. It brought some tropes and some cliches in that I know some people weren't really fans of. There was some controversy surrounding the replacement of Erin Hayes as well there. A lot more backstory than we can get into here, but overall, I personally really love it. I'm a big fan of King of Queens and Kevin James in general, so this was right up my alley and definitely one of my favorites here, like I said. Compare that to 8 Simple Rules here, a very different style of show, mid-2000s on ABC, of course. The main star of this one, John Ritter, RIP, unfortunately passed away following season 1 here. So really for me, this show, as much as I can appreciate the later seasons with David Spade, of course, I really only look at this as a 1-season show because John Ritter was just so good in this role as Paul. We also have Kaylee Cuoco on this show as well. This was one of her first roles, of course, before The Big Bang Theory, and then Katie Siegel as well there as Kate was a really great role for her as well. Another family-style sitcom here, very simple, but very effective all the same. So comparing these two, like I said, very different shows here, but because of the fact that I think the later seasons of 8 Simple Rules were just not as good as season 2 comparably to Kevin Can Wait, I'm going to give Kevin Can Wait here the win for round 1. So that'll eliminate 8 Simple Rules here. Let's take that one off of the notes here, and we are down to 15. So let's go into our RNG once again. Pull that back up, and now we are left with these 15 here. So let's pick another 2 here. We have number 2, which is the Bernie Mac Show. Great African-American sitcom there. One of my favorites. And number 12 here, The Neighborhood. Interesting choices here. So we got Bernie Mac, and let's pull over The Neighborhood as well here. A current show, so pretty different in that regard here. All right, let's pull that over. So we'll start with Bernie Mac here. Like I said, one of the most iconic black sitcoms out there. Of course, Bernie Mac, one of the most celebrated comedians of all time there. Really got his start back in the late 80s, early 90s with movies like The Kings of Comedy and Mr. 305 and stuff like that. Really celebrated in the Chicago area. Of course, that's where he's from. And in 2001, Fox approached him to do a sitcom based on himself, and it was going to be self-titled, of course, there with an all-black cast, and that was a lot of fun to see. In my opinion, in retrospect, looking back on this, it really does feel like a reskinned Malcolm in the Middle. Of course, Malcolm was another big Fox show that premiered around the same time there, and kind of had some tropes and some stylings that were very unique for the time. It was a little bit edgy for a standard network sitcom. It definitely had a little bit more of that teen angst to it. And the Bernie Mac Show brought a lot of that into its style as well there. The fourth wall breaking, very prominent on this one as well. There's segments where Mac directly talks to the audience, which are a lot of fun. So it does feel like a little bit of a copycat at times to Malcolm in the Middle, but it definitely has its own identity. Bernie Mac is very personable. He's very charismatic on the show. Really a great lead to carry something like this. Compared to The Neighborhood here, this is a more modern take on a sitcom here. laugh track style, so very different production compared to Bernie Mac there. This one starring Cedric the Entertainer, Max Greenfield, who you might know from New Girl, as well as Beth Burrs, who you might know from Two Broke Girls here. So bringing in a lot of familiar faces for this one here. I've always described this show as something that doesn't deserve to be as good as this is, because you look at this cast, you look at the production behind it, the laugh track, the multi-camera setup, and you think this is just not going to be very good at all, but it is surprisingly really well done. There's a lot of personality with this group, lots of good chemistry here. The simple conflict of just new neighbors coming into an all-black neighborhood is a very simple, idea for a show, very simple premise, but is effective, and it has a lot of heart to it as well. But personally, I am going to have to say Bernie Mac will take the win here, just because it was very unique for the time, and I think Bernie as a lead here is a lot better than the cast for The Neighborhood, respectively. So we are going to take out The Neighborhood here, our second one eliminated. We are down to 14 shows. Let's go back to our RNG tab, pick out our next two. We have number 10 here, which is an old school classic with the Monkees here, one of the most iconic from the 60s. And number 5, I'm sorry there. Should have had that down to 14. Let's try that again. So we have the Monkees as well as The Good Place here. Very interesting choice. All right, so we got The Good Place here. Of course, Michael Schur with many, many familiar faces there that we will talk about in just a second, as well as the Monkees here, one of my personal favorites from the 60s there. Super, super iconic. We'll start with that one there. The Monkees, of course, probably better known as a rock band, of course, from the 60s, but actually got their start on a sitcom here, which is pretty interesting. Some people have compared their kind of career to something like... what's a good example? Kind of like a Big Time Rush almost, where they had a band and they had the sitcom or the show simultaneously, right? So there was some crossover appeal there. They would sing a lot of their songs on the show, and it would be kind of musical in that regard, which is pretty interesting for the time, and then obviously inspired shows like Big Time Rush to come out later in the 2000s there as well. But the main cast for this show, super iconic, like I said. I think there are aspects to it that haven't aged as well as you could probably expect from a show that's over 50 years old at this point, of course. But overall, this is something that if you need that itch scratched for that classic, 1960s old school kind of laugh track vibe, then this is a good one for you here. Certainly has a lot of really good episodes that hold up even to this day. Compare that to The Good Place, though, and The Good Place is on a whole nother level with its storytelling, its thematics, its production, of course. The cast on the show is fantastic, specifically Kristen Bell and Ted Danson, of course, super, super great as Eleanor and Michael, respectively here. Michael Schur, like I mentioned earlier, who is best known for doing The Office and Parks and Rec and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and then later The Good Place here. This one is easily going to go to The Good Place. As much as I love the Monkees as well, it just does not compare to the amount of consistency and the great storytelling, like I said, that The Good Place carries here. It's obviously a little bit more modern, so it has more elements that work better for this kind of time frame than something from over 50 years ago. So we are going to take out the Monkees here, eliminate them, and we are down to 13 here. So we've gotten some good matchups so far. Let's see what else we have. Number 2 here. All right, we're going back to Bernie Mac here. Let's see what show it's going to compare it to. Oh, I did that same thing again. Gotta take out the number, so let's try that. All right, 13 there. So I was gonna say Wizards of Waverly Place either way. So, all right, so we'll keep Bernie Mac up here, and we'll grab Wizards of Waverly Place. So we already talked about Bernie Mac, so we won't go too much into detail again there, but let's talk about Wizards here. If you guys know me or my content, probably best familiar with the fact that I am a big Nickelodeon guy here. A lot of the Dan Schneider stuff like iCarly and Victorious, Drake and Josh, that was more my style than any of the Disney Channel shows. But of all of them, between like Wizards or Hannah Montana or Sweet Life on Deck or something like that, I would say Wizards is probably my favorite growing up, with Selena Gomez, of course, as Alex as the lead here. This is a very kind of interesting idea for a show. It has some elements kind of similar to Sabrina the Teenage Witch in that regard. That's probably the closest I would compare it to, about a group of, young kids who discover that they have wizardly powers and their parents are wizards, and they have to essentially learn how to use these in an effective way and properly, while also the challenges of just growing up and being an everyday teen, of course, alongside that. So has some relatable moments to it for sure. It was definitely fitting for the Disney Channel kind of brand. Had some good, lovable characters to it, but didn't ever feel preachy at the same time. Had that right balance between it. But again, for me, I'm going to have to go Bernie Mac on this one. Just feels like a more mature modern day sitcom, of course, comparably. And I think overall between the two, at the end of the day, a sitcom is supposed to make you laugh. And when I watch these two, I laugh more with the Bernie Mac show comparably. So we are going to eliminate Wizards of Waverly Place here and take them out as another victim here in this tournament here. So we are down to 12 shows here. Let's keep on going. Gotta replace that so I don't forget this time. Let's keep on going here. Number 6, so we got The Good Place once again. And number 5 here, we have The Flintstones. Interesting. So our first animated show on the list here. So let's grab over The Flintstones here, and we'll compare those to The Good Place here. Again, we already talked about The Good Place, so we don't really need to go over it too much once again, but we'll talk about The Flintstones here for a second. This was actually one that when we did the original tournament with Matt and Mike, I really wanted to include The Flintstones here, but there were so many other great animated shows like Family Guy and Bob's Burgers and American Dad, of course, all those that overtook it. But The Flintstones, in my opinion, more so than any of those other shows, even something like The Simpsons comparably, I think The Flintstones was one of the most influential, groundbreaking shows for its time. Really, really inspired a lot of great animation down the road here. Of course, you can see they're debuted back in 1960 there, so well over 60 years old at this point here. Easily one of the most timeless shows on this entire list here. Ran for 6 seasons, and watching it back to this day, you can find a lot of great moments and great sort of writing here that, like I said, inspired a wave of animation down the road here. Definitely in terms of its influence, certainly has the vote over The Good Place. But again, quality-wise, these are very, very different, but I think The Good Place is going to just barely edge it out here just because of its substantial focus on the humor here comparably to The Flintstones. I think the live action setting, the kind of fantasy setting that The Good Place carries is a little bit more interesting than this kind of prehistoric setting comparably to The Flintstones there. And like I said, the cast, I think, on The Good Place is really, really well done. The voice cast for The Flintstones just does not compare, in my opinion. So unfortunately, as much as it has a ton of influence and it has a ton of great, moments that hold up to this day, we are unfortunately going to say goodbye to The Flintstones here. An adamant effort for sure. We are down to 11 shows here. Let's keep on rolling with this. We've had some great matchups, like I said, but looks like the Bernie Mac show and The Good Place certainly are top contenders at this point here. Number 11, we have Will and Grace, classic NBC here. And number 4 with Dharma and Greg, Chuck Lorre. All right, so 2 brand new ones here. This will be an interesting matchup as well here. Grab these ones over. We'll start with Will and Grace here on NBC. Like I said, probably arguably the most influential show of all time for the LGBTQ community, of course. This was one of the first network shows, not even a sitcom, but just shows, period, that featured gay characters as their leads there. Of course, Will and Jack, played by Eric McCormick and Sean Hayes, respectively, there were 2 of the first that really broke through that mold of featuring gay characters and kind of presenting them different storylines within a network sitcom there, which is really groundbreaking for the time. You can see there it debuted back in 98, so it certainly had a lot to prove in that sort of sense, and I think it did that really, really well. Of course, it was so popular that it came back in 2017 with a reboot there. That was one of the first really kind of monumental reboots that happened within this kind of span of the last, like, say, 4 or 5 years or so. Will and Grace, I remember having a lot of buzz surrounding it, and stayed pretty consistent throughout. A lot of people will talk down about reboots and remakes in the modern day era, but Will and Grace's revival, I think, really got a lot of people talking, and it was a lot of fun to see all these characters come back, of course. But the original show still holds up really well. I've heard some people say, including something that I agree with too here, which is that I think it's actually aged better than a lot of these shows because it was very progressive for the time. It really set a precedent that no other shows were really comfortable with doing back then, and that has aged really well and really gracefully since, no pun intended there, really gracefully since it debuted over 20 years ago. The humor on this show, really iconic as well there, with the four. Kind of has a Friends style setting where they're all in New York, of course, and they're just kind of living out their adult life. There are a lot of sitcoms kind of follow that trope. Comparably to Dharma and Greg, this is a pretty underrated show in my opinion. Chuck Lorre, of course, probably one of his lesser known shows, but definitely one of my favorites there. This one's set in San Francisco. Here follows our two titular characters who, in the very first episode, we see they without really knowing it, kind of incidentally, 20 years ago when they were kids, found each other on a subway train and kind of always remembered that moment between each other. Just something about that. They had some spark or some chemistry that they couldn't ever forget about. And then 20 years later, destiny arises where they meet back on that subway train and they realize that that is the same person they saw 20 years prior. And they end up starting a relationship together and they end up getting married there. Kind of follows a lot of the same tropes as all these blank and blank sort of sitcoms like Mike and Molly per se, or Mork and Mindy. Anything that kind of has like a couple, in the title there, and kind of follows those similar storylines and a lot of those kind of cliche storylines, but does it in a kind of unique and original way compared to a lot of those others, with, of course, Chuck Lorre's brand of humor there in the show as well there. But comparably, I'm going to have to give this round to Will and Grace here. I just think it was a lot more influential comparably, and I think it's aged a lot better. Definitely more popular of these two as well there. So even though I do really enjoy it, Dharma and Greg is going to have to get eliminated here in this round, and we're going to take them out as we break it down to our top 10 here. So we still have some really good ones here. There's still a few good shows that we have not yet discussed here. About half of these we have not discussed yet, but let's keep on going here with our top 10. We're going to take that down to 10 here and pull up our next two shows. So number 10, so we have Will and Grace once again. We're going to keep that. And we have, number 6 is Last Man Standing here. Oops, so we'll pull over Last Man Standing here. Like I said, we already talked about Will and Grace, so we'll talk about Last Man Standing now. And this show is fantastic. I love this show with Tim Allen, of course, as Mike Baxter here. This is going to be a controversial statement, but I actually like Last Man Standing more than Home Improvement. Home Improvement, of course, Tim Allen's really big show that premiered back in the 90s on ABC, ran for, I think, 8 seasons it was, very popular. But Last Man Standing actually surpassed that here just recently, as it ended just this year in 2021 here with 10 seasons. Very good show, in my opinion. The one major problem with Last Man Standing that it always had kind of trouble with, in a weird way compared to a lot of other shows, is its casting. There were a lot of instances of recasting on this show throughout the seasons. One of the lead characters, named Kristen, was recasted after season 1. So the original actress they broomed her after the first season and brought in Amanda Fuller there, who would eventually play her throughout the rest of the show. And that was a really good choice, but it was kind of weird how it was like so sudden and abrupt how that happened. They also had to recast Mandy at some point. I think that's when they made the transition to Fox, which, speaking of that is where I just stopped watching this show. The first, 5 to 6 seasons, I think, are really, really well done. The writing is really strong there. All the characters, they have some really good chemistry with one another, really good development as well throughout the first half of the show. But when it made the jump to Fox there after its cancellation from ABC, that is when I just tuned it out. I do not like the Fox seasons whatsoever. I think the new actress they got to play Mandy just wasn't really good. I know Eve, the actress Caitlin Dever, who's one of my favorites, pretty much walked away from the show at that point. She came back every once in a while as like a reoccurring character, but just it never felt the same after that. So that's my big issue with Last Man Standing. Comparably to Will and Grace, obviously never had all those problems there. It was way more consistent. So it really comes down to, do I think that the first 5 or so seasons of Last Man Standing peak over the entire show of Will and Grace, even though it's much more consistent there? And that's a tough question to ask, because it really depends on your preference, of course, and very, very subjective here between these two. But again, I think this might be controversial, but I think I am going to say Last Man Standing here is going to take the win here, if only because those 5 seasons at the very beginning are so, so good and very, very iconic. Just have so much great development in the story and everything and the characters. But even though I don't like the Fox seasons, I would rather watch it overall, I think, more than Will and Grace personally. So that is going to be Will and Grace's End here, unfortunately, coming out in the top 10. But that leaves us with just 9 shows remaining here. Let's see if we can get some of the ones that we have not discussed yet here in this next round. We have number 1, so American Housewife. That is one of them for sure. And number 3, Blackish. All right, so that worked out there. Let's pull over American Housewife and Blackish here, 2 ABC sitcoms. These two were kind of they started around the same time in the mid-2010s of sorts, kind of when ABC was on the revival of a lot of their family sitcoms. They did these two. They did Fresh Off the Boat around that time. They did Suburgatory around that time, which is another show we have on here, which we'll eventually talk about at some point. But yes, American Housewife here. Let's start with that. Katie Mixon, of course, from Mike and Molly, doing this one after that show ended in 2016, and then this one started around then. I do like this show, definitely. I was never as big on this one as some of the other shows in ABC's catalog, especially something like Modern Family, which, as many of you guys know, is one of my all-time favorites there. But American Housewife certainly had its moments. I will say the basic kind of premise of this show is very, very simple and doesn't really leave a lot to the imagination. There's not really a ton of, great storylines that you can draw from this. Simply put, it is just Katie Mixon as one of these like PTA stay-at-home mom sort of archetypes in a really affluent, really wealthy neighborhood that kind of comes from a middle-class background and is the fattest mom in town. That is literally the whole premise of this show. So it's really, really weird. It's not the most, intelligent or original idea by any means, but it's just very simple, down-to-earth comedy. It has, like I said, it has its moments for sure. There's a lot of good tension in this show between Katie Mixon's character and many of the other moms on the show, of course, and sort of the way that they raise their kids versus how she raises hers, and kind of has some commentary to it in that regard about how we treat others and how we view other people in modern day society. So it kind of touches on themes like that, but it never really goes super in depth with any of them to really make it super memorable or to make it stand out enough as well as other shows. So that's always kind of been my problem with it. But like I said, it had moments here. Blackish, on the other hand, this one, I think comparably, really, really well done, at least for, again, its first few seasons here. I would say 1 through 4 on this show are fantastic. Definitely must-watch shows. I've seen this ranked up there with some of the best sitcoms of all time or some of the best black sitcoms of all time, and I certainly agree with it. Those first 4 seasons, super, super insightful. They also did a lot of these like social commentary type storylines, obviously surrounding black culture, and they did them really, really well. They never came off preachy. They never came off like they were trying to just say stuff just to say stuff. They actually had some, justification or some weight behind them. And it always was balanced really well with some great performances by Anthony Anderson or Tracy Ellis Ross, or of course Lawrence Fishburne as well was a big part of this show early on. But the big kicker with Blackish, of course, was the fact that, again, last year when COVID was introduced into the show, that is when a lot of people just tuned it out, myself included, and never looked back here. It's actually about to premiere as I record this in just a few weeks here. Its final season, so that'll be season 8, and it'll be the final one there starting in January. And I'm hoping for the best for it. Maybe it can redeem itself with that last season, but I personally am not going to be watching it. I think season 7 just did too much damage to this show to really rectify it, and it's kind of going out on a low point, unfortunately. So it might, in the future when we talk about Blackish and we look back in retrospect for this show, how much COVID really introduced into it and how that affected TV as a whole. It'll be interesting to see the conversation surrounding that later. But as of now, it's just too, realistic and too raw of a portrayal of something that was so prominent in everyone's lives that you just couldn't escape it, and Blackish was definitely feeding into that, unfortunately. So this is another tricky one because, again, Housewife, not as big on this overall as I was in the first few seasons of Blackish, but Blackish certainly had the lowest of lows comparable to anything that American Housewife did. So it's another tricky one, but I think I am going to stick with Blackish here just because, again, those first 4 seasons really, really did a lot of good for this cast and really, really showed a side of sitcoms that hadn't really been explored for quite a while here. Very dramatic at times and very, very honest with what it was trying to say, but again, balanced that a lot with the humor here. So American Housewife, even though it was consistent, I am going to have to eliminate it here in this tournament. So we are halfway through here. We have 8 shows remaining. Let's quickly recap where we at. So we have the Bernie Mac show. We've talked about that. It's already won 2 different rounds here, so definitely a big contender. Blackish, of course, doing really well. The Good Place, I think that's won a couple as well. Kevin Can Wait here. Definitely great with Kevin James, of course, Last Man Standing. And then these last 3, Married with Children, The Munsters, and Suburgatory, we have not yet touched on. So let's see if we can get one of those here with this next roll of the RNG. Number 8, we have Suburgatory. That is fantastic. Love to see it. And number 4, Kevin Can Wait here. All right, so let's pull that one over. Suburgatory is a very, very underrated show. I know some people that talked about this, and it was always just kind of like, it exists, it's just very middle of the road. It's just very average. There was never like a huge, what's the word? A huge demand for this show. Ratings wise, it was always just kind of middle of the pack. It never did enough to really set itself apart. But I say if you're one of those people, give it a second look because there was a lot of good stuff on the show. I think the cast on this show was just really, really good, man. Of course, we have Jeremy Sisto here, who you might know from Law and Order of all things, or FBI now. He's definitely ingrained in the Dick Wolf sort of action dramas, but he actually did Suburgatory for a little while. He did a sitcom here post Law and Order, so that was kind of interesting. We have a pre-Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist Jane Levy here, of all people. Of course, Zoe's Extraordinary Playlist, massive show for NBC right now where she is the lead there, but this was before then when she was younger, when I think she was a teen when she did the show, and she's great on it. Cheryl Hines, super iconic on the show as well. Who else did we have on this? Anna Gasteyer, really, really good as well here. Just a lot of familiar faces, on this show as well. We have Alicia Silverstone, who you might know from Clueless as well. Lindsay Shaw, who you might know from Ned's Declassified. There was a lot of really, really familiar people on this show. Really, really a fun, just kind of family sitcom. It really meshed well with the ABC lineup as well. This was, again, around that same time when we got shows shows like Modern Family had just premiered a couple seasons prior. The Middle we had, even though I'm not the biggest fan of The Middle, but that was also on ABC around this time. So it just kind of fit in with those family sitcoms there, and then that would lead to other shows like Blackish and American Housewife, like we talked about before. So kind of laid the groundwork for a lot of that. But yeah, certainly its cast, I think, is its biggest strength here with Suburgatory. Very, very underrated show. And then Kevin Can Wait, like I said, we talked about that as well. But between these two, this is another tough one because Kevin Can Wait wasn't on for as long, so there isn't as much to draw from here, and there was, a bit of controversy surrounding it, but I think it was a little bit more popular overall than Suburgatory. Another one that has a really good cast, of course, with Kevin James, Leah Remini, Gary Valentine as well, another one from King of Queens that they brought back, so that's pretty interesting as well. So this is a tough one because either of these I could see, you could pick certain aspects to them or pull out certain elements that you can make an argument for why one is better than the other. But personally, if it just comes down to which one I would rather sit down and watch, I think I'm going to go with Kevin Can Wait here just because I do love myself some Kevin James there. But Suburgatory, very, very underrated as well. Definitely worth a watch if you have never checked it out. Unfortunately for this tournament, though, it will be eliminated here, bringing us down to our top 7 here. A little bit more than halfway. Let's keep on going here. We have number 1, again, the Bernie Mac Show. Fantastic pick. And The Good Place here. All right, so our 2 big contenders here, Bernie Mac and The Good Place, going head-to-head. So again, we've talked about both of these prior in this video already, so no need to really recap what we've said. But between these two, just for its popularity and its creator, I am going to have to go with The Good Place on this one. Definitely Michael Schur, easily one of the biggest in terms of the modern day sitcom creators, up there with people like Chuck Lorre, of course, also doing really well here. But Bernie Mac, like I said, I love it, and I think Bernie Mac is just such a great lead for a show. Just really, really love his style of comedy. But The Good Place, a little bit more, cohesive in terms of a story. Really, really good cast on here as well with Kristen Bell, like we said, and then Michael Schur just to top it all off. The Good Place here is going to take this one over our reigning champion here, the Bernie Mac Show, which takes it out here as we draw to our top 6 here. So still a couple shows that we have not talked about yet, making pretty far in this tournament. So let's see what we have here. Number 5, we have Married with Children, classic from the 80s. And number 4 here is Last Man Standing. All right, this is where it gets pretty intense here to see where all of these shows line up comparably to one another. Married with Children, of course, I don't think needs any introduction. Easily one of the biggest, most prominent shows ever on TV, with Ed O'Neill, of course, Katie Siegel, Christina Applegate. The cast, super iconic here. Obviously, a lot of people compare this to Modern Family, of course, because Ed O'Neill was on both of those shows. I do prefer Modern Family, but Married with Children certainly had a lot of great moments on it as well, with him playing Al Bundy, of course. Just such a lovable yet hated character at the same time. He can be a real dick and a kind of a douchebag at times, but you can't help but root for him as well. You just really want to see him succeed in his life and get past all his struggles as well here. But for me, again, I think I'm going to have to go with Last Man Standing on this one, just because the high points of Last Man Standing always were, at least for me, over the high points of Married with Children here personally. So we are going to take out Married with Children here. That brings us down to our top 5 shows here, which, as we recap here, look like the following. We have Blackish, The Good Place, Kevin Can Wait, Last Man Standing, and The Munsters here. Another classic 60s show that we have yet to discuss here. So let's keep on going here. Our top 5. This is where it gets really tough. You have to really pull hairs here. We have The Good Place here to start, and we also have... Come on, give us something other than The Good Place. All right, there we go. Last Man Standing. So The Good Place and Last Man Standing going head-to-head here, already next to each other. So again, both of these have won multiple rounds here, and I absolutely love both of these. Probably each, by comparison, within their respective eras on TV, this modern day kind of Michael Schur landscape, or with Last Man Standing kind of the ABC family sitcoms, easily both in their top 5 respective in both of those categories here. But again, because of consistency, I'm going to go with The Good Place on this one. Last Man Standing, it's gotten a really good run in this tournament here, but unfortunately, because of those last few seasons on Fox there, was not able to win another round here compared to The Good Place here. 4 seasons, very short and very sweet, never overstayed its welcome comparably to Last Man Standing's 10 seasons. So consistency-wise, Good Place certainly has this one over Last Man Standing there. So that'll be the end of it. Finishing in the top 5, not too bad whatsoever. Let's see what we have here for our top 4. Let's really see if we can get the Munsters in here. Number 1 is Blackish, and number 2 is The Good Place. Wow, the Munsters making it very high here as we have not seen it, but that's all right. Blackish and The Good Place here. This is the same story here. I'm going to have to go with The Good Place over Blackish here, again, because of the COVID season. Season 7 of Blackish just really turned me off from the show. The Good Place, way more consistent, way more cohesive story writing. So we are going to take out Blackish here. We are down to our final 3 here. The final 3 shows that have the opportunity to win this tournament here are The Good Place, Kevin Can Wait, and The Munsters. So finally, let's see what we got here. Whoops, we have to add that to number 3. All right, let's do it. We have The Munsters officially entering the chat finally, and Kevin Can Wait here. All right, so let's talk about our final show of the day, which is The Munsters here. Family friend of my mom's here actually introduced this to me and Matt a long time ago. Shout out Kat, super cool for introducing us to The Munsters here. Classic black and white from the 60s here. Definitely the oldest of all the shows that we had on this list here. Kind of a parody show of sorts, kind of like spoofing a lot of those classic monster movies like Frankenstein and Dracula, all those, classic universal monsters of sorts. Definitely spoofed them in the location that they have. They all live in this big old mansion here with all these, creepy artifacts, and there's cobwebs everywhere, and there's spiders and everything. Al Lewis, who played Grandpa, of course, was kind of a parody of Dracula, or like a vampire of sorts in that regard, and he always lived in the basement because he needed a dark room. So it had kind of like little in-jokes and stuff like that to it, but it was very popular for the time, of course, and I think it holds up really well here. I've seen a lot of these in reruns. Of course, it's one of the most replayed shows on TV alongside stuff like Gilligan's Island or The Monkees we talked about earlier. I Love Lucy, all those classic 60s, black and white TV sitcoms there. And then comparable to Kevin Can Wait, again, like we said, a little bit more of a modern day show here. The laugh track and the cast, of course, on the show, definitely a standout there. But comparably so, I'm going to have to give it to Kevin Can Wait here. Again, this is just personal preference. I think if we were just doing this more objective and it was just like, what... compared to a lot of these other shows, The Munsters, very influential, super important for black and white TV, definitely laid the groundwork, like I said, for a lot of these other shows, but personally, I just get more out of Kevin Can Wait here myself. So that eliminates The Munsters here, which means we are down to our final 2 shows here on this podcast, Kevin Can Wait and The Good Place here. So it comes down to these 2 shows. And again, I really enjoy both of these shows. They have definitely proven themselves in this podcast tournament. But if I had to pick one, gun to my head, and I can only watch one of these going forward here, I am going to say the one and only The Good Place here is going to take the win for me. This is just such a fantastic, iconic show here. Like we've talked about a billion times at this point, Michael Schur, of course, leading the pack here behind the scenes. Ted Danson, Kristen Bell, easily 2 of the best leads on TV here. It just incorporates so many good elements from every single component that makes up what TV is, from its acting, its directing, its writing, performing, the visual sort of aspects to it as well, the sets, location, the cohesiveness of the story, its guest stars too. That's another thing I haven't even brought up, but lots of familiar faces coming in doing little reoccurring characters or guest characters as well. Super exciting to see that. Wrapped up its story really with a really great finale. Never, it didn't draw itself out for like a decade like a lot of these other shows did. Just wrapped a very nice sort of ending it had there as well. The Good Place here certainly deserving of taking this top spot today in this mini podcast tournament here as our victor. So I hope you guys did enjoy this. This was a little bit different for the show. A lot of fun to look over a lot of these sitcoms and kind of go over the opportunity to talk about shows that I've never really been able to on this podcast. So if you enjoyed this, definitely give it a like and share this video out with someone that enjoys TV as much as we do. Also, let me know in the comments if this is something you maybe want to see me do again with either other sitcoms or maybe dramas or something like that. We could certainly have those guys over here and do some of these mini tournaments as well in the future if that's something you'd be interested in. But otherwise, thank you for watching once again. Have a great day, everyone, and we will see you here in the next one.